The Last of Us Part 2, the most stunning and brave video game of all time. What could we mere mortals have possibly done to deserve this video game that can only be described as a gift from the gods? Before we get into the discussion, did you guys see that thing about JB Hi-Fi in Australia and the sign they put out for The Last of Us Part 2? I'll just show you. I'll tell you something, man. They got cajones over there. And it's funny because outlets are going out of their way to say like, oh wow, they put in all the effort to make that box art. Dude, it's been a meme on the internet for a while. They just pulled it up and printed it. It's still goddamn hilarious. Like I said, man, they got nuts over there. With that out of the way, in my last video, the Last of Us 2 video that I made, the previous video, Jesus Christ, in the video I posted before this one, ESL baby, gotta love it. In that video, I basically lampooned Time Magazine's review of the game because halfway through they go into a weird tirade of woke political agenda. They even cite feminist frequency as a valid source of information. It was that bad. Normally when I post videos, I aim for like an 80% like rate. Out of 100 people, I expect 20 of you to be offended. It still legit cracks me up every time I see that dislike number go up. Gonna click that dislike button, that'll show you. That's what I imagine you guys sound like, but that video got a lot more people upset than I expected, so I went to check it out to be like, ooh, what can I harness from here to upset more people in the future? Unfortunately, it wasn't anything that I expected it to be. Here's me quickly addressing every single criticism in that video so far. How can you hate on the game when you haven't even played it? I don't remember hating on the game. I remember hating on the review of the game. In fact, here's all I said about the game itself. But anyway, looking at it, I'm sure the game's fine. I'm sure it's not a bad game. Why are you hating on the game just because it has alphabet people? Look up answer to first question, and 2, I don't hate anything because it has alphabet people. I hate the fact that it's used as propaganda. I do not hate alphabet people. I treat everybody the same regardless of their race or S to the blank to the E to the blank X, U, orientation. I can't. The things we have to do to get around these goddamn... But I don't really care about that. Do what makes you happy. I just find it funny when it's used as tokenization and a means for companies to basically manipulate the masses and the demographics they're tokenizing. Don't want to get too much into that, but I don't hate alphabet people. Now, with that being said, if y'all are going to be that goddamn sensitive about me hating on the game in a video where I clearly didn't, I'll just do it for you here. The game probably sucks fecal matter. There you go. Now if you cry about it, at least there's grounds for it. And lastly, what the most amount of people surprisingly took issue with was me calling out the dozens upon dozens of 100 out of 100 reviews. 10 out of 10, 100 out of 100. I take issue with that because I don't think anything is perfect. Some of you said, I don't think they think it's perfect either. Exactly, that's my point. And some of you say, that's not what the review scale represents. 10 out of 10 doesn't mean perfect. I know. I don't agree with it though. And to get into more detail about this, we're gonna watch Alana Pierce's video that she put out talking about this whole thing. I found out about this because I heard about all the hate that SkillUp was getting over his Last of Us 2 review. People claiming he's alt-right, I mean, along with what, Polygon and Kotaku, and the SJW Bible itself, Vice, apparently, is also alt-right now, because they don't like The Last of Us 2 either. Ironically, SkillUp falls under very hard left political views, which is why I found his review interesting to begin with, because it's like, well, this aligns with pretty much what your beliefs are, but I guess the gameplay elements, mechanics, yada yada were bad enough where you couldn't like it. That was interesting to me. But anyway, in a recent video, he brought up Alana Pierce's video, and I was like, oh, I know who that is. I saw her on Total Biscuit's podcast years ago when she first started working for IGN. R.I.P. TB. Sorry, it still really sucks that he's gone, but in the video, she talked about working for IGN and the review process and 10 out of 10 reviews and the discourse behind it and all that shit. So we'll look at portions of the video and we'll respond to it because she shares a lot of the sentiments you upset people had with the last video. So anyway, let's jump right into this.
First thing that I want to talk about is not directly related to that, and to a lot of you might seem obvious, but is a thing that I notice that the internet gets confused about all the time that has come up this week specifically. The Last of Us Part 2 is getting a lot of 10 out of 10 review scores. I do not personally agree with these scores. Frankly, I would not have given The Last of Us Part 2 a 10 out of 10.
She didn't think it deserved a 10 out of 10? Hashtag Alana Pierce's over party.
However, that doesn't make me any more correct than the people who do believe it is a 10 out of 10, and I genuinely do believe that they think that. The one note that keeps being brought up to me is people saying, well, it has flaws, how can it be a 10 out of 10? Which is where I pull up the IGN is most people's go-to. God, this chair's taking up so much screen. So if IGN is most people's go-to for scores, they do get the most traffic on their reviews historically, and obviously I can talk about IGN as I worked there as a full-time employee. Let's talk about the IGN review scale. A 10 out of 10 is not perfect. That's really it. A lot of you, again, probably already know this point, but I want to jump to it off the bat. 10 out of 10 does not mean a game is perfect. Nothing is perfect. On IGN scale, a 10 is listed as a masterpiece, and I generally agree with that. A 10 should be very difficult to get, and I do believe there are pieces of IGN's past where they gave out 10s way too readily, but I digress. 10 out of 10 is not a perfect game.
So that's pretty much the sentiment that a lot of you upset people were trying to convey, right? And here's why I still don't agree with it. So just because IGN historically gets a lot of traffic does not mean they are the be-all end-all of reviewing. Their review scale is not the universal standard for all reviewing. There's a certain expectation with scores, especially from the outside looking in, to people who are not familiar with the games industry. The idea of scoring is taught to us at an early age. From academics, we're graded based on how many correct answers we get out of 100 usually. This idea then translates to how we perceive other things in life. Like athletics, for example. If you watch a diving competition and you see the judge hold up that 10, you know that because of the move's difficulty and the technical precision of the diver and the landing and everything was executed flawlessly. And even then, it's incredibly rare for all of the judges to hold up a 10. One judge might be like, oh, well, it's a half second off or whatever the hell it is, so I'll give it a 9.9. You see what I mean? Like, it's the same thing with gymnastics, right? And if we want to apply it to a medium that is closer to video games, we can talk about film. When you see 10 out of 10 on a film review, you expect it to be visually and technically perfect, with the other elements, cinematography, screenwriting, directing, acting, scoring, composition, blocking, everything to be exemplary. With those cases, with those movies, you'd be hard-pressed to find things that are wrong with those films. But not for the good old video games industry, am I right? It's close enough to a 10 that I'll just give it a 10. What the fuck is that standard? And even Alana here brings it up that reviews that talk negatively about aspects of the game still gave it a 10. Like, that is a joke. That is why IGN reviews are a meme. And you're gonna tell me you're gonna apply a meme as the standard for all video game reviews? Fuck that.
That's something, even I, when I was younger, I'm like, 10 out of 10, isn't that like, it's perfect, man?
Yeah, I hate this point so much.
But look,
it makes me so mad.
You do have to sit there and actually think about what is a 10.
Yes.
And I do understand the idea that nothing's going to be perfect.
Yes.
And of course, if it's a masterpiece, then is it, you know, is the game the best it could be for what it's trying to do in this current moment? Yes.
So many people think this though. So many people come at me like you said, like, you know, if I've ever mentioned I would give that game a 10 out of 10, they're like, well, no game is perfect, so no game could ever achieve. They say this, they're like, a 9.9 is the best a game could ever achieve, because nothing is perfect. It's like...
Again, still a fan of layman gaming, but yes, I do think that 9.9 should be the highest you give if you don't actually believe that the game is a 10 out of 10. At the very least, you, the reviewer, should be able to walk away from it saying, I cannot find anything wrong with this game. And that's at the very least. Alana then talks about Metacritic, which is interesting if you're not already familiar with what Metacritic does. Anyway, here's what she has to say about that.
Another thing that I want to talk about is Metacritic, because this is a thing that people also don't know. Metacritic doesn't actually accurately just aggregate scores. There are a couple of games at play where Metacritic is concerned. For one, there are a number of negative reviews of The Last of Us Part 2 that are unscored. If we click here, Polygon's review is unscored and says, Part 2 ends up feeling needlessly bleak at a time when a nihilistic worldview has perhaps never been less attractive. The Vice is also negative. The Last of Us Part 2 feels complacent, yet also preoccupied with its predecessor. Every facet of the original game has been expanded on and enlarged in the sequel, but not actually improved. Kotaku, same thing. None of those accomplishments elevated or redeemed it for me, like the nature consuming Seattle or the outbreak consuming humanity, its ugliness overshadowed everything else. These don't have scores. I would say they're probably more likely to be mixed than they are to be inherently negative, but what Metacritic will often do is try to score the unscored reviews itself. They will kind of guess and then add a score, and maybe they'll do that eventually for these ones that are currently unscored, but they do that. They also weight different outlets' review scores differently. So like IGN, because it is The Guardian would be one as well, Game Informer, because they are considered reputable outlets, they get a higher weight than other websites that Metacritic might not be familiar with too. So that is also a thing that is worth noticing.
Now, I was familiar with the whole them putting their own like score to a non-scored review. It's interesting that they've decided to hold on the Polygon and Vice one and Kotaku. The negative ones, I mean, I'm sure they're going to come out mixed once they're actually given a score, but it's interesting that they're holding out on that. I can't imagine that the weight that they're using, like when they do weighted averages, that it's based on actual metrics, because how the hell would they get access to that? So it has to be like their own internal weighing system as far as how they perceive or value different outlets. I mean, it's not entirely surprising. Like I said, I already knew about these things, but I never actually talked about it. But at the end of the day, it's still way more reliable than like Rotten Tomatoes after the Captain Marvel thing, for instance. The last part of her video that I want to kind of discuss is when she talks about outlets not being paid to give positive reviews. So let's hear what she has to say first, and I'll give my thoughts.
Obviously, the public continues to have this idea that reviews are paid off, or that reviewers are giving The Last of Us Part 2 a 10 out of 10 because they don't want to be blacklisted from getting more review copies from Sony. The only time that I have ever heard of Sony being annoyed at an outlet where review copies was concerned was when they broke embargo. An outlet agreed to not talk about a certain thing or do something, and the outlet did it. You are not giving The Last of Us a 10 out of 10 so Sony will give you more review copies. They wouldn't do it. And the truth is, if that's a thing that you're worried about, I think that you should be getting angry at Sony and Sony PR and the embargoes that they did put on The Last of Us Part 2 that prevent people from talking about a lot of the second half of the game. But I also 100% believe that this is this dude's opinion. This is how Jonathan feels about this game. Knowing this guy personally, I am positive that he at no point thought, I better give this game a 10 so IGN can get more reviews.
So here's the thing about that. When I allege, or anybody alleges, that these outlets are being paid by the video game companies to put out these positive reviews, I'm not literally saying these companies are sending a paycheck or dropping off a bag of cash or whatever the hell it is. What I'm saying is closer to the whole blacklisting thing. The outlet's revenue is directly tied or impacted by the relationship with the video game developers. If you have a good relationship with a video game developer, they'll give you early access, you'll get first looks, previews, things that generate clicks, things that generate revenue for your company. Marketing materials, special events, things that you can make videos about that generate you more revenue. In other words, things that get you paid. I don't even truly understand why she's trying to perpetuate this idea that this doesn't exist when she basically admits that it exists when she talks about IGN firsts later in the video.
I think IGN first is a bit shady. That is a thing where IGN gets very early access to games as like a cover story, Game Informer style, to do a bunch of previews. Previews are largely positive because you only really see the part of the game that the dev knows is going to be seen positively. But that exchange of access does mean it would be very complicated for the ongoing relationship of that month of IGN First or whatever it is if you did say anything negative. I always feel like I was honest in every IGN First that I did. It was maybe 2 or 3. But it is hard to say that there wouldn't be some unconscious bias there that could potentially exist.
But she basically says in the video that she was never told to change a review score if she thought negatively about a game, that was it. Sure, whatever. Your anecdotal experience does not necessarily mean it didn't happen. The all access media thing is a real thing. Like, you will get blacklisted if you talk negatively enough about a company. Like, if IGN were to give Naughty Dog negative reviews for every video game they made moving forward, do you think at some point Naughty Dog's not gonna be like, you know what? Let's not send them any more copies. And the same goes with any other video game developer. Much like they do with YouTubers actually talk about this shit. Many have come out and said like, oh yeah, they were giving me like review copies and shit until like I said something negative about the game, and then bam, that relationship was over. They stopped sending me anything after that. It's real. I don't know why she's trying to argue against it. Maybe because she's still a part of that industry in some capacity. Don't want to ruin future prospects and so on and so forth, but it does happen. She goes into a lot more detail about what it's like working in that industry. If you're interested, I'll put the link to that video in the description down below. Look it up. And leave a comment down below, smash that like button, and subscribe with all notifications on so I can see you in the next video. Thank you very much for watching. I will see you there.